What I wanted to share with you is something about leadership that I've learned over the years working for the UN, UNDP, working with the US Congress, working in many different settings. When we talk about leadership, when you call yourself a leader, when Catherine and Claire say we need a new kind of leader, what is the evolution of leadership? Where is leadership going? Where has it been and where is it going? If we don't know that, we're leading in a vacuum. We're leading without a map. And I don't have the map, but I have a couple of different frameworks that I think might be useful. And my own interest in this is that all of us have this precious thing we're leading. It's called our life. You know, we're all leading our life, and we're all wanting to lead our life and use it well, the precious time and energy we have. So for me, this question of leadership is actually very personal. And at a couple of points in this, I would like to drop into a personal place. Here are the three questions that I want to address. Why do we need a new kind of leader now? Exactly why do we need that? Why is this topic urgent? Why is what you've been presented this afternoon so important? Why is it so timely? Secondly, when we say a new kind of leader, exactly what are those qualities? What are those qualities and how do they develop? If we have a life and we want to become that kind of leader, what do we do? And do we have a map for it, a compass? And finally, let's say we become those kind of leaders. Will we actually lead our countries? Or will someone else lead them? In every country where the UN has assigned me, there are leaders I'd be proud to work for. And there are leaders that I would hate to work for. Well, what is that pattern that happens in every culture? And how is it happening in our culture? And how is it happening inside each of us? And what do we call those different kinds of leaders? So those are some of the, to answer the first question that's in bold, we need a new kind of leader because we're in a new situation. I won't talk more about it. You've heard so many wonderful speeches about it. You know that we need a new kind of leader because in this time of great transition, in time of great change, you have all kinds of leaders who emerge. And the first kind of leader that emerges is the kind of leader that says, I'm going to lead us against them. They're dangerous. They're the enemy. They're terrorists. I'll lead you. I'll protect you. I'll save you. It's the classic methodology that Goebbels described for Hitler when he said, it doesn't matter what your society is, we can always get the people to follow us. We just say we're being attacked. We're just being attacked, and we'll defend you against them, and anybody who disagrees with us we'll call a traitor. He says it works everywhere. So the demagogue is present in every culture I've ever worked in, including my own. The second kind of leader that emerges is the manager who says, wow, things are changing. I see some opportunities here. I see some possible profitable enterprises I could start. There's some ways in which my people and my family and my community could prosper in this time of crisis. I don't want to do harm to anybody. We're just going to prosper here, and I'm going to manage some enterprises so that it works for us, that this time of change works for us. And I will take and ground my identity in the fact that I am benefiting us. Them, oh, I'm sorry about what's happening to them, but us, we're going to flourish. And the manager's very good at that. But I think there's a new kind of leader that's emerging that you've heard referred to in so many of the talks. It's implicit in Don's second-tier methods. It's implicit in Catherine and Claire's method. It's certainly implicit in the way that Ocean was thinking, and it's definitely part of the New Story's vision. And that's what I call the mediator, and what we could also call the evolutionary leader. The mediator is someone who's actually striving to be a leader for the whole. A leader who's actually thinking systemically and trying to see a bigger picture. A leader who actually acknowledges that things are evolving, does not claim to have all the answers, but is willing to have a heartful and humble process for taking us towards a possible outcome that works. So an evolutionary leader, I would call it, is a mediating, boundary-crossing, transformative leader working in service to the evolution of the whole. And I would love to study the new transition stories and bet you that that's the kind of leader that's present in many of those emerging stories. It's a different kind of leader who bridges us and them. So let me pause for a moment and just ask you, this isn't theory for me. My professor at Harvard was Erik Erikson. I studied the life cycle. I'm interested in human beings and the lives we live and how we live them better and more usefully. And so are there people today who you think symbolize this kind of leadership that I'm talking about? Is there, let's start with politics, is there a political leader who you can think of, oh yeah, he or she symbolizes that kind of leadership to me that Mark's talking about? Who would you think of? Hillary. Who else?
Dennis Kucinich.
Dennis Kucinich. Elizabeth Warren. These are wonderful American names, but imagine now if I asked you to give me a name that you think would come up, as it has, when I've done this presentation or a version of it in Hong Kong, when I've done it in Nairobi, when I've done it in San Francisco, when I've done it in Tokyo and Seoul. What's a name that comes up all over the world again and again? So why do you think Mandela? Why Mandela? He comes from a small country in South Africa. He spent half his life in jail. He had no money. He didn't run Apple Computer. He wasn't president of the United States. Why Nelson Mandela? What was it about his life that brings that name up in every place I've ever spoken in the world within the first couple of names? Ask yourself that question. What was the journey that Mandela was on? What was that leadership journey for him? And that's a political leader, but what about somebody in the more spiritual, cultural realm? What's a name that would come up in the spiritual or cultural realm, no matter where you go in the world, where people say, oh, that person. Did you say the Dalai Lama?
Yes.
So why the Dalai Lama? There are very few Tibetan Buddhists in the world. It's a small country, very few of us have traveled there. Why not the head of the Church of England or Billy Graham or the Pope? Why the Dalai Lama? What was it about the Dalai Lama that made that name come up and from the spiritual sphere? And who are the other names that would come up if you asked yourself this question in different parts of the world? And what is the pattern? Or to use Don's term, what is the meme that they share? What's the energy? What's the perspective that they all share that has something in common? Beautiful, yes. Compassion, inclusivity, all these qualities which we're about to look at. And they also, for me, forgiving, integrity, yes, creative. So this is a path. All these qualities were not with them the day they were born. Or you could say maybe they were with them the day they were born, but they didn't go straight to that. Just like Don's method shows, there's a journey that the humanity's on. There's a journey each of us are on. And I think I would call that the outer evolution of leadership. And Mandela and the Dalai Lama both, if you read carefully their writing, and I'll use Mandela as my case in point because he's written a very clear autobiography. He said, I started out just caring about myself and just wanting to be happy myself. And then I realized being happy myself wasn't the only thing that mattered. I wanted my people to be happy. My people were oppressed. And the black people of South Africa, I wanted them to be free. And then I realized that the black people of South Africa would never be free if everybody in South Africa wasn't free. We had to free everybody in South Africa because everybody was actually enslaved to apartheid. And then I realized that, South Africa would never break free of apartheid unless we got the US and the UK and other nations to start treating us differently and stop reinforcing apartheid and got them to be part of the progressive movement for change with us. And then I realized that all living things, all humanity needed to be free because we were interwoven and interconnected. And that's a very powerful journey that I think if we could take the time for each of you to tell your stories, we'd find experiences that were moving each of us on this journey. And I think you can look at what's happening in many cultures around the world, including our own, and notice how peoples are stuck at various places on this journey. I think we have all of these elements inside us, just like we have all of the memes that Don was talking about inside us. The question is, do we have access to them as leaders? And how are they changing in importance? How is something that once was very rare and very unusual in the world becoming something that each of us actually need to develop? And I want to credit Don and Ken Wilber and others for making me more aware of this pattern and of this path. Because this geocentric or global awareness is no longer a luxury. In fact, it's implicit in every presentation that's been made today, and it's implicit in almost every topic that we are going to discuss. So to stay inside my little brief time limit, I want to ask now more clearly, what are the qualities that these leaders have? If this is the journey that they're on, what are the qualities that they have? And I have found a number of the words that you were shouting out a few minutes ago, which I love, fit into these categories: mindful, heartful, embodied, and soulful. And in my writing about global citizens, I've just made it into language that is easily translated into many, many different languages. And I've used the phrase opening our minds, opening our hearts, opening our hands, and opening our eyes. And to me, if what I just showed you is the outer evolution of leadership, this is the inner evolution of leadership. As Claire and Catherine were talking about, in our culture we've been tending to dominate here, in a very masculine mental frame of reference. And when I look at the histories of the Mandelas and the Dalai Lamas and others present in this room, I see a movement to embrace different kinds of intelligence. I see a movement to embrace all four of these directions. And I call this not just opening our minds, but opening our hearts, our eyes, and our hands. And they have in common, as different as they are, this opening process is, I think, how we meet Einstein's challenge. In the way that each of us open our eyes and our mind and our hearts, that's how I believe we start to raise the level of awareness that we have. And this paraphrasing is, I want to thank Margot King for this paraphrasing, because this is not actually Einstein's phrase. Einstein's phrase was, problems can't be solved at the same level of awareness that they were created. And Margot, I think, rightly said, let's reframe that. Problems can be solved at a higher level of awareness than that which created them. So how do we move up that spiral that Don was talking about? How do we open our hearts? I find that absolutely global citizenship in this path to evolutionary leadership is closed to the mind alone. There is no way the mind alone will ever reach it. There has to be a way in which our hearts open, because our hearts are absolutely key to holding this earth. There's no way the human mind can hold it without the heart. And Pema Chodron captures that beautifully. The purpose of opening our minds, I think opening our minds is critical, because each of us have been taught something. There's no one I've ever met in the world who wasn't taught something as a child that wasn't true. Everybody's been raised in a specific culture that told you a particular cultural worldview. So we all have to unlearn. We all have to open our minds. It's the great leveler. I can teach anywhere in the world. And whoever I'm speaking to, whether they're Chinese or American or Russian or British, there's something we've got to open our minds to that's been closed by our training. And opening our hands to me is the metaphor that says, after we've done this opening process, we have to find a way to work together. All of this purpose is, people often will say, let's work together. But you can't really work together if your mind is closed, your heart is closed, your eyes are closed, you're not really seeing clearly. Your collaboration is not going to be fruitful. So opening our hands is fundamental. And in my book, there's a chapter on each of these. But I just want to close by just saying something about opening our eyes, because the spiritual dimension, to me, is extremely important. And I want to say very practical, extremely practical. And it's practical because if we can't see the world, we can't serve the world. If we can't see evolution, we can't serve evolution. If we can't see creation, we can't serve creation. And I'll often say to groups that I work with, have you ever seen the world? And they'll say, oh, well, I've seen the world. But what they really usually mean is, what they've really seen is the lens through which they see the world. And this is a language by which I understand some of Don and Elsa's work. It's that there's a series of lenses through which we can see the world. And if you're not aware of the lens, you never actually see the world. So it's that process of becoming aware of the lens that I think is part of becoming an evolutionary leader. It's also at the heart of being a mediator. And I think it's also at the heart of spiritual awakening, is becoming aware of our points of view and freeing ourselves from them. And if you think about it, all we really have in classrooms around the world are images of the earth that the human mind has created. And the human mind kept creating new images and saying, this is it, or this is it, or now I've got it. But in fact, we haven't ever really had any experience of the earth except for those who've actually been around the world in those capsules. And when I have the necessary environment, we turn the lights off, we put the screens up, and we spend 2 or 3 minutes listening to a string quartet play John Lennon's Imagine, and we watch through the spaceship portals the Earth below us. Because to me, that's the only time when human beings have actually come close to seeing the Earth. And each of us have that opportunity. I can take you to YouTube and you can watch like the astronauts did, and I would encourage you to put some music on that you love and watch in silence the Earth for 3 minutes. Because you'll have an experience that turned engineers and technicians and scientists into mystics and visionaries, because the act of seeing the Earth was so exquisitely powerful. What we have to do, though, is open our minds, hearts, and hands, and I think the leaders of the future, the qualities that they have, the evolutionary leaders, have the quality of recognizing that genetically we're one. The data is now here. We're all brothers and sisters. Physically, we're all one. Our bodies come from the Earth. Our ancestors, if we go back far enough, prove that we're part of the Earth. We're all one. The environment shows we're all connected. Our food and water establishes that we're all connected. So does our money. We don't determine the value of our money. The global economy does. Look at the clothes you're wearing and the shoes you're wearing and where your purses and your iPods come from. We're global citizens in terms of our possessions. And our arts and media are definitely global. Nobody ever watches things that are exclusively American or Russian or Korean when they live in a particular place. So my experience is that if we really open our eyes, we start to become evolutionary leaders. We start to become meteors. We start to become global citizens because we start to see what all of us know is true. But so few people still see this. So few people still see this. Most people are still seeing the world through the lens that they were given in those first 7 years of life when we are shaped, and Bruce may talk more about this. We were shaped in those early years, and we're still seeing through lenses of which we're not aware. And I think to be an evolutionary leader, we have to start becoming aware of those lenses and freeing ourselves. So that brings us to the final question I want to address, which is, all right, let's say there's evolutionary leaders with global perspectives and who see the world in a more visionary way. And let's say that they're all over the world. They're in Kenya, and they're in Guyana, and they're in Nepal, 3 countries where I've worked for UNDP recently. They're in the United States, they're in Mexico, they're all over the world. Now tell me a country in which they're actually governing their country. What country have you been to where you say, oh, the leaders here are actually governing from one of these higher level perspectives that we all believe in? Well, I've been to some countries where I'm sometimes inspired by a particular president or sometimes inspired by a particular leader. But I've been to no country where the leaders that I think need to be in charge, need to be developing, need to be guiding that country are actually in power. So there's a fundamental... Pardon me? Sweden is coming very close. Costa Rica has some wonderful qualities. Like I said, there's a number of places that are closer than others. But the bottom line for me is that we still haven't learned the lessons implicit in some of the presentations today, which is that to truly lead the whole, we have to become more aware of the different memes, the different lenses, the different languages that the culture that we're leading speaks, and figure out ways to lead the whole, as Don calls it, the president of the whole, and that's not easy. So some of the times I'll go to a country and there'll be leaders who'll say, yes, I'm a citizen of this country and I'm a leader of the world, I'm a citizen of the world. But in every country I go to, there are also leaders who are saying, close the borders, blame them, demonize them, they're the problem, get rid of them. The demagogue and the boundary builder, the wall builders are present in every culture. So the real question is, what's going to determine in any culture who governs? And the determination is going to be based on, and this is where I think evolutionary leaders, this is why evolutionary leaders cannot just be spiritual recluses, why we can't just be spiritually evolved and sit on our cushions in our spiritual enlightenment and take pleasure in the wisdom and beneficence of existence. This is why I think we also have to have some form of action, because otherwise we can sit there and actually be on our cushions, maybe in some state of enlightenment, while the world crashes to pieces. And I don't think that's what creation is asking for us. Creation is asking for some way for us to bring our consciousness into action. And so for me, the 2 maps that I rely on, just to review, the first map is this one. That's been very personal for me. I spent a lot of years caught in this area thinking, oh, if I've thought it through, if I've created the framework, if I've written the book, I've done the act. And the map is not the territory. Pointing to the moon is not the moon. And charting these maps is not the same as living them. So I've been challenging myself and ask you to challenge yourself. How can we continue to deepen for ourselves and for our culture this expansion of really understanding the wisdom of all parts of this quadrant? And then this second map, if that's the inner evolution, this is the outer evolution of leadership. And how do we further for ourselves this journey? How do we embrace these different levels of consciousness in ourselves? How do we inspire our own culture? In this case, I'll speak as an American. How do we inspire America to think and act more globally in the world? Fundamental challenge facing us, each of as Americans. Because if we can really do this, then we have the opportunity to start to see the whole. And I believe ultimately, each of us have the capacity within ourselves, even if we never leave the Earth in a spaceship, we have the capacity to lead from this perspective. We have the capacity to lead with this awareness. Previous generations did not have the photograph. Previous generations did not have the internet. Previous generations did not have a lot of the tools that we have. And I think we now have the spiritual and psychological tools for developing this awareness in ourselves, in our children, in our neighbors, and our cultures. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.